If all the evidence that you've gathered over the years was presented in today's court system, do you think a jury would come up with a verdict of suicide or murder?
I'm quite convinced, although one could say I'm not objective. I think I'm ultra objective, or I would not have chosen to present this case, that they would most certainly decide it was a case of murder.
Okay. It's also, I guess he was a de facto key player in the formulation of the UFO policy. So is there a connection between UFOs and his death?
Yes. I say this from the point of view of somebody who's not a mental health professional, but with some pride, that for 8 years, with several very necessary breaks, I worked as a volunteer and then a volunteer and a shift supervisor at the busiest suicide hotline in America, the offices of a brilliantly important British-based organization called Samaritans International, where people like me were not trained to be, fake psychologists. We were trained, though, to be available to people who were depressed, mentally ill, suicidal, lonely. And in that time, I interfaced with quite a number of psychologists and psychiatrists in my private life and in that part of my life who had come to specialize in suicide. The circumstances surrounding the alleged suicide are patently absurd. And what I heard from every person I presented the case to was that in their experience, jumpers jump, and people who want to hang themselves, hang themselves. They don't try to hang themselves out of a window of a 16th floor building. In any case where somebody is so terribly in despair that they are considering ending their life, those of us who have been fortunate enough not to be standing on that actual or allegorical ledge, sometimes come to think that their mind is clouded and full of confusion, where that may be the case in some instances. Also, that it's often not one reason, it's a complexity of reasons. And I think that that was the case with Mr. Forrestal. It was not just one reason. However, I have come to believe incontrovertibly that a major consulting reason was the tremendous sense of personal failure that he had, and the understanding that in the minds of very powerful individuals in Washington, by having a nervous breakdown, and a very public one at that, that he could not only no longer be trusted, but that he knew where all the bodies were buried, if you know what I mean. He knew all the secrets and what happened if he recovered and then had a relapse. I think James Forrestal not only understood this, but it was so clear to him that in his mind, as a patriotic American who had done his best and failed miserably in his estimate, that he knew he had to die. And the two instances of suicide that sadly I was able to fully document leading up to his institutionalization was him acting like a good Roman soldier and trying to throw himself on his sword, but literally stopped by individuals around him who cared.
Yep.
When he began to truly recover and regain his will to live, he signed his own death warrant. And as I make note of in the documentary, I think it's fair to say that the individuals who would have had to have been very highly placed, who forced him out that 16th floor window, may well have had great respect and admiration for him. But as they say in the mob, it's nothing personal, it's just focus. He had to go. Let's also remember here that now in current day America, and I feel around what we refer to as the first world, every single one of us either has been or knows somebody, be it a family member, a friend, a business associate, a neighbor, who has seen a therapist or a psychiatrist or a counselor or a psychologist at one time or another, or their kids have. Going back to 1949, this was not only not the case, but probably 99 out of 100 Americans had never known anybody who had put themselves into this kind of position. As Archie Bunker used to say, you got to be crazy to see a psychiatrist. It was simply not done. And as you study Forrestal's life, he really emerges as kind of an ultimate alpha male.
Yep.
He was not just somebody who kept in shape. He was a very competitive tennis player, a professional level golfer. He was a passionate amateur boxer, even into his serious career. It was a sport that he loved very much. He was charismatic. He was tough. When he was in university, he had his nose broken in an amateur boxing match, and he decided not to have it reset because he thought it would make him look tougher in life, and you see photos of him. However, he was also a very sensitive soul. He studied the classics at Princeton. One of the major accounts that emerges surrounding the evening of his death was when looked in by an attendant. He was copying a Sophocles poem out of an anthology onto hospital stationery. And all of these factors count in the tragedy that emerged.
He also, during the days leading up to his death, or maybe even well before, reports that he was concerned about being followed by foreign-looking men, and there's reports suggesting that they resembled the infamous Men in Black. I mean, is there any truth to that?
Yes and no. I was extremely careful in pulling together what amounted to 30 plus years on and off of research, of keeping away from rumors, myths, legends, even very popular ones with a hint of possibility behind them somewhere. For example, there are, with him and Truman, there are several days in their daily logs in July of 1947 where they're not accounted for. Did he visit Roswell in July of 1947? He may have, but I cannot say that with certainty, so I build on other things. There's a very fine film about another major player in Roswell, Major Jesse Marcel Sr., the Roswell Army Airfield Base intelligence officer, whose life was destroyed, literally destroyed, by his being the military individual to follow up on his base commander's orders and to let the world know that they had parts of a crashed, truly anomalous UFO. He was forced the next day to pose with fragments of a mobile weather balloon, and that photograph went out to papers all over the world. Jesse became an alcoholic and chronically depressed. I'm off on a tangent here. The reason I bring it up, though, is because a good friend of mine, a brilliant artist and filmmaker and writer, a true Renaissance man, Paul Davids, made a very fine film some years ago called Roswell about Jesse. However, there is a sequence in it where an actor playing James Forrestal is in a secret location in Roswell looking through a glass window into a room with a gray type alien. And the implication in the scene is that this being got into his head, and that was what destabilized him. Forrestal reported in the days leading up to his breakdown, two Navy officials, his servant, who the FBI took an account from, that he was concerned about strange men possibly being on the property. I don't remember any description of how they were dressed, but they might as well have been, or at least allegorically, men in black, so to speak. As they say, though, you don't have to be paranoid to know that somebody is following you.
Exactly. He had a shaky relationship with the Air Force Secretary at the time, William Symington. I mean, did this have any bearing on his eventual demise? I mean, there was a secret conversation that took place the day he stepped down, and Symington, I think, pulled him aside and said something to him that reports say really, really worried him.
That's a very good question. Is Stuart Symington, and he was the first Secretary of the Air Force. One has to remember that until the reorganization under Forrestal, there was a Department of the Department of War, Department of the Army, Department of the Navy. The new boy in town, the Air Force, was now competing for available funds with the other military service branches. And Symington was particularly aggressive in the manner that he did it, adding stress to Forrestal's life. Immediately following the change of command ceremony, indeed, Symington was heard saying to Forrestal, quote unquote, "There's something I would like to talk to you about." Nobody knows the conversation that followed, but Forrestal was noted sometime later to have disappeared from the room, and a thorough search followed within that very large building for him. He was found in his old office, sitting behind his desk, and when whomever the individuals were opened the door, the accounts are that he was literally sitting at the desk, staring at the wall, repeating the phrase, "You are a loyal fellow."